Hello everybody, welcome. Welcome to DOTCon 0.5. As with DOTCon 0, we're at the lovely Funkhaus. It's a really amazing venue. I don't think there's anything quite like it anywhere else. Thank you all for coming. So it hasn't been quite a year since our first DOTCon and since the first Web3 Summit, but since then quite a lot has happened. On the Parity Polkadot implementation, we've, one of the main things that happened last year at Web3 Summit was the announcement of the substrate framework for building blockchains. And this was basically in the initial stages of the implementation of Substrate, where we had just broken out the two code repositories and from Polkadot and said, okay, there's going to be Substrate for building blockchains, and Polkadot is going to be one of the blockchains built on top of Substrate. And this was the vision. So since then, we've implemented that original vision of Substrate. We've extended it further to accommodate things like pluggable consensus and to implement this nominated proof of stake and slashing and all the fancy features that are needed for Polkadot, and we've brought those together as well. Outside of Parity's Polkadot implementation, we've also seen so much progress on other frontiers, namely the fact that now that Substrate exists, we've seen so many projects start to emerge and begin to build upon it, to build their own blockchains using Substrate. So we're seeing projects across two prongs. One is those who are beginning to build blockchains that will later become parachains, and you're going to hear from many of those today. And the other prong is alternative Polkadot implementations. So there is a specification of the Polkadot runtime environment protocol, and this is being used to build alternative implementations of Polkadot that will be used to keep the network strong in the case of software bugs. So that is a huge amount of progress since last year. We'll also be today presenting some of the advancements in protocol level improvements. Things like parathreads, which Gav will give a small presentation on later today, which are designed to lower the barrier to entry of obtaining a parachain slot by multiplexing parachains over many slots. You'll also hear about one of the biggest items of news, which is the Kusama network, which is essentially a proving ground for the code that we've already written for Polkadot. You could think of it as a test under real economic conditions of the proof of stake and the parachains and the slashing and all of those components that we've written for Polkadot. So just put that out there in the wild and see what happens, right? So that's going to be very exciting, and you're going to hear much more about that just after this from Gavin. This DOTCon is mainly meant to sort of set the stage. It's DOTCon 0.5, so to set the stage of what's going to happen between now and the initial release of the Polkadot mainnet relay chain, as well as sort of set the tone for what's going to happen afterwards. So to sort of reiterate our core thesis of interoperability and specialization is the idea that, in any engineering problem, if you try to come at things in an extremely general way, you're going to have to make sacrifices in terms of how good that solution is, because you're not specializing for a particular problem. So the idea behind Polkadot is of course heterogeneity, that you have projects that are particularly good at specific things, and on any one of those projects, you might be able to do something in particular very well, like zero knowledge, privacy, payments, or something that does really fast payments or smart contracts. But what we really care about, of course, is creating this network effect, and that's where interoperability comes in. And I'd like you to keep sort of these thoughts in mind of specialization combined with interoperability to create a more powerful decentralized web. After the launch, there's a number of really interesting sort of avenues for projects to pursue. I'll just throw a couple of ideas out of there to see where people take it. And we have a lot of time. I think this is a fairly casual event, and it's quite interesting that we have lots of workshops and we have a good mix of developers and just technical-minded people. So there's going to be lots of interesting conversations to be had around here, and I'd like to let you know that the members of the team who are around here are available to chat about interesting ideas and further directions that can be built upon Polkadot. So some of those, for instance, would be that you have parachains right now. The way that Polkadot works is you have a parachain and you have validators which are validating a state transition of that parachain. And the caveat there is that you often send a proof of state transition. So for example, all the accounts, all the state that you need in order to execute some transactions. So one of the most interesting avenues for scalability in this sense is the idea of zero-knowledge state transitions, or at the very least succinct proofs of state transition. So that instead of sending along a megabytes large piece of data, you would be sending along a very, very succinct piece of data that can be used to prove that a successful state transition has been altered. And this is going to really blow up the capacity that Polkadot can process and provide security for. And the other thing that is very interesting to think about if you're a DApp developer is sort of what is this world of cross-chain decentralized applications going to look like? What is the process there, and what are the tools going to look like? So after the launch of the initial relay chain, we're going to need projects and ideas emerging on how to handle this sort of entirely new design space where you may have components living on entirely different blockchains. So with that, I'll conclude the opening remarks and hand it over to Gavin to talk about Kusama.